What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, February 1st, 2018. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. And, of course, you got 2 weeks until Valentine's Day. So if you've got a significant other, start making your plans right now. You miss Valentine's Day, you will suffer for it. Quick little reminder today, in our third hour, Greg Felton, he's an author. He's going to be joining us to talk about his new book. And yes, we are still planning on having the lovely Lady Claire in hour number 3 tomorrow. Next Wednesday, in our third hour, we'll have Don Wiskin from Extendivite. He'll be joining our show. So let's get on into it. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Put you on the air with your comments and questions here. Now, the latest word on the FISA memo, it will be released tomorrow. Apparently, the White House counsel finished his looking at it. Trump is signing off on its release, and it's on its way back to the House Intelligence Committee, which will do the actual formal release tomorrow. And even Democrats are admitting this memo could get Mueller and Rosenstein fired. And this memo has created a record amount of buzz in Washington. Never in American history has a memo, congressional memo, generated this much Sturm und Drang here. And apparently the FBI is making a last-ditch effort to block the release of the memo, or at least to discredit it before it even comes on out. The FBI is expressing their grave concern over the memo. And basically the FBI is out there saying, well, you know, those are Republicans over there. Those are Republicans on the House Intelligence Committee. And they can't say that the memo is made up, because even the Democrats on the House Intelligence Committee were forced to acknowledge everything in the memo is factual. There are no factual errors. It's all backed up by other evidence. And so the FBI's new approach is to say, well, they left things out. You're not getting an accurate picture of what the FBI is doing because they left out important exculpatory information. For example, they didn't mention the bake sale that we're going to have this coming weekend. They didn't mention what great dancers we are. And nobody pays attention to our barbershop quartet anymore. So really, without those, you're going to get a very skewed, disputed image of the FBI. And obviously, that casts doubt on the memo's accuracy. Now, amazingly enough, Lou Dobbs reported that the FBI sent 5 top agents over to the White House this week to try and alter the FISA memo. And interestingly enough, one of Judicial Watch's top investigators basically came on out and said the FBI is essentially threatening the president. The FBI, Chris Farrell is out there saying, the FBI is threatening the president. They put him in a corner and said, we really don't want you to reveal all the criminality that's going on. This is a grave threat to the Constitution. And I'm sure that the FBI institutionally remembers what a rough time they had following the COINTELPRO exposures in the 1970s, about all the skullduggery that was going on during the 1960s and the targeting of anti-war protesters, targeting of Native Americans, targeting of the early feminist movement, the attempt to fan up racism between blacks and whites as a way of undermining, again, the anti-war movement. They were really after Martin Luther King because Martin Luther King was opposed to the war in Vietnam, and he was fully supportive of ending the draft, and he was out there pointing out that the black kids being drafted into the military tended to be put predominantly in the combat units, high risk, while the white kids got those safer rear echelon jobs. So they really did not like him. And when COINTELPRO came on out, it came dangerously close to delegitimizing the entire United States government, to find out this modern-day Stasi or Gestapo had actually been operating in our midst with the blessing of the entire federal government. And so Congress had to hold hearings, and they passed a whole bunch of laws that limited activities that the FBI could engage in. And so for a long time, the FBI was forced to behave itself and act like, well, the FBI. And unfortunately, during the administration of Bill Clinton, those laws limiting what the FBI could do were rescinded, which is why the FBI went right on back to behaving like the Gestapo, the Stasi, the GRU, and so forth and so on. Now, Adam Smith, he is just out there just screaming anything he can think of to try and discredit the memo ahead of its release. And now he's out there running around the media saying that Nunes has secretly altered the FISA memo, that the version of the memo given to Trump isn't the one the House Intelligence Committee voted on. It's a ringer. It's a completely different memo. And so he's up there saying that Nunes has made significant changes to the memo which were not approved by the committee. Well, Adam Schiff, again, has a bad case of hoof-in-mouth disease, because Byron York of the Washington Examiner has said that the changes to the Devin Nunes memo, which Adam Schiff is currently freaking out about, were minimal. They were grammatic changes. There was one change requested by the FBI regarding sources and methods, and a two-word change requested by the Democrats for accuracy. That was it. And Adam Schiff is out there trying to claim that Nunes pulled a fast one. It's a completely different memo. It's not the one we all voted on. Boy, have you ever seen so much panic? Now, what the memo is basically reportedly going to reveal, again, it's a confirmation, official recognition by the House of Representatives Intelligence Committee that, yes, the FBI and the Department of Justice were using discredited, unverifiable information to spy on Donald Trump and his associates at the same time that they were, in fact, trying to cover up for the Hillary Clinton crimes. So, spoiler alert, there may be something else in there, but that's pretty much it. And those of you who are reading my website and listening to this radio show and to the other hosts on RBN, you already knew all of this. But what we finally have here is a watershed moment where Congress is actually admitting that what we have been telling you happened all along really did happen. Not that it really matters what Congress says or does any longer, but it's a nice little pat on the back. All right, we're going to do a quick shout out to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Nancy Pelosi has really lost it, and apparently she is now sending out memos, her own memos, demanding that Nunes be removed from the Intelligence Committee. And she's also out there claiming that Nunes made material changes to the memo that were not approved by the committee, that he's exceeded his authority, that his only goal is to help the White House discredit the Russia-Trump collusion investigation. So she's having another little meltdown over there. Story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Basically, observers are saying that one of the ramifications of the memo, when it comes on out, is the judges over at the FISA court are probably going to have a very strong reaction when they realize how badly they were used and abused by the Department of Justice and the FBI. They're going to be very angry that they were presented with unverified information and told it was absolute fact, justifying the issuance of a warrant on U.S. citizens. Now, here is the real shocker. This is just coming on out. The Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, has come on out and acknowledged Donald Trump was under surveillance from the minute he won the GOP primary. As I said before, this is the Democratic version of Watergate. That's what this is going to wind up as. Some people are going to go to jail. Some people are going to be forced to resign. Now, back over at Judicial Watch, they've asked the Department of Justice Inspector General to investigate that strange meeting on the airport tarmac on June 30th, 2016, between Bill Clinton and then Attorney General Loretta Lynch. And nothing has happened yet. And now, according to Bill Clinton and Loretta Lynch, they basically threw the crews off of their airplanes out on the tarmac so they could have privacy to talk about their grandchildren. That's their story. But of course, it was only shortly thereafter that Loretta Lynch, working with then FBI Director James Comey, gave Hillary Clinton that get-out-of-jail-free card. So something's going on there. And of course, we have this new scandal that's coming on out about how FBI officials were given the emails from Anthony Weiner's laptop that the New York Police Department discovered when they were investigating Weiner for sending pictures of his wiener to an underage girl. And the FBI failed to inform Congress before the election that these emails did include classified information sent back and forth between Hillary Clinton and Huma Abedin. They kept it quiet. They covered it up to protect Hillary Clinton. I think Paul Ryan's got the right attitude. The entire FBI needs to be replaced. Certainly, all of the top management needs to be replaced. And you need to bring in people who are good investigators, who are not touched by all that drug money corruption that pervades inside the Beltway. I've said it before, one of Trump's biggest mistakes. The day he set foot in the Oval Office, he wanted to be magnanimous in victory, and he allowed all these holdovers to stay in their jobs. What he should have done was fire everybody, which is his prerogative as the president, and started filling those staff positions with qualified people from outside Washington, D.C. Because the people inside Washington, D.C., they aren't smarter than the rest of us. They like to pretend they are, but they're not. They're just more ruthless to get their hands on power. But there are qualified people out here all over the country who could do those White House staff jobs, and they're not compromised by their past associations with the Central Intelligence Agency, with the Clintons, with the Bushes, with the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, the DOJ, or any of that nonsense. We voted Donald Trump into the White House because he was an outsider, and he should have brought in a staff of outsiders, and he wouldn't be fighting all these fights that he's having to deal with right now. And this continued effort, a year into his administration, by the Democrats, by the deep state, to find some way to get rid of him before the entire lid comes off all these scandals that have been happening. Now, getting on back to the State of the Union, and the Democrats are still screaming about it and how terrible it was and so forth. But the polls have come on in. CBS ran a very comprehensive poll. These are the numbers, and they are a nightmare for Democrats going into the midterm elections this November. Now, to nobody's surprise, 97% of Republican speech watchers liked the State of the Union speech. More interesting is that 72% of independents liked it, and here is the shocker. 43% of Democrats thought it was a great State of the Union speech. The Democrats are in trouble. Their rising star had too much lip gloss. As I understand it from the local Democrats here, Tulsi Gabbard is already considered toxic. They don't like her politics. So she's not even going to be considered at this point. But I mean, look back at the State of the Union speech. I mean, the Democrats booed when Trump mentioned the murder victims of MS-13. And when he was talking about black unemployment rates being greatly improved, they just sat on their hands. They weren't going to acknowledge anything he's done. I've never seen such a divided government. I've never seen a Congress that is literally on the verge of war with each other. And I understand tensions get high in politics. One of the reasons I like to watch parliamentary debates in Great Britain is they're allowed to yell and scream and carry on. The rules for the American Congress are very restrictive. You have to call everybody, by dignified names, even if you think they're absolute pond scum. And that actually goes back to an issue that happened in the early years of this country, where apparently one member of the House of Representatives attacked another one, with a pair of fire tongs. And at that point, everyone said, we really need some rules here before this gets out of control. So that's what's going on. Now, getting on back to MS-13, over at MSNBC, Joy Reid basically was criticizing Donald Trump for even talking about MS-13 because, nobody that doesn't watch Fox News has even heard of MS-13. That's not true. There have actually been several documentaries about MS-13 on places like History Channel and various others as well. All right, let's take a phone call, and this is Kevin in West Virginia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mr. Mike. Once again, bizarre news. Every time we wake up today. My comment is about the GOP train. I live in West Virginia, not near Greenbrier, but not too far from there. And this is bizarre to me because we can't take what they say on the news at face value. I mean, we know they're liars. We know sometimes their narrative is so completely bizarre. And I'm not saying that this was an attack on a GOP, but we can't, rule out the possibility that somebody, I don't know what their end game will be, but we can't rule out the possibility that something like this could happen.
No, I agree. I agree. And there are bits of the story that aren't really making any sense. And apparently, the reason only the engine of this chartered train derailed was that the engineer had somehow been informed there was an obstruction at this crossing. And so he'd been slowing the train down. He was trying to bring it to a stop. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough distance. And that means that this trash truck had to be sitting on those tracks for an interval of time. He wasn't just trying to dash across, and he couldn't dash across anyway because this railroad crossing has the gates, okay? And so the issue is, why was the truck sitting there? Supposedly, there were two people in it, one of whom is still alive. Why did they just sit there? Why did they not get out of the way? Those little crossing gates at the railroad crossings, they're not built strong. They're actually built to break if they get hit, just in case somebody is caught on the track when the gates come on down. And certainly a trash truck, which is designed to haul a huge amount of weight, would have enough energy to break through it. So already it's shaping up. Something weird was going on. This truck was just sitting on the track in front of this chartered train. The chartered train did get a warning. They were able to slow down, which is why more people weren't badly hurt and killed. Yeah, and you're right. They were on their way to the Greenbrier, and for those of you who don't know about it, the Greenbrier is this luxury resort up in the mountains, and underneath it is this bunker where Congress is supposed to go to live in the event of a nuclear war, and it was built during the Cold War with Russia, and then when the Soviet Union collapsed, they admitted it was there, and they actually opened it up as a tourist attraction for a while. Now it's been recommissioned, and it's back in operation as this bunker. Unfortunately, of course, anybody who is going to attack this country with nuclear weapons now knows where to aim to get the Congress. But it's a luxury resort, and that's where the GOP likes to have these annual policy retreats. Now, Kevin, we got to take a break for commercials. Stay on the line. I'm going to come right back to you after these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And for those of you who would like to support Republic Broadcasting and keep us on the air during this time when we're finally about to achieve a breakthrough and get some of this corruption out, exposed to public scrutiny and criticism. If you want to send a check or money order, the postal address is Republic Broadcasting Network, 2251 Double Creek Drive, number 3, Round Rock, Texas 78664. If you want to call us and pledge to be a recurring subscriber, the number is 800-724-2719, extension 03. And folks, we wouldn't ask if we didn't need it, because we know that all of you are struggling the same way that we are. And we just need to pull through this together. All right, getting on back to the phones here. We're talking with Kevin in West Virginia. And yeah, I'm looking at that story about the near disaster with the train, because if the train had hit that trash truck at full speed, it probably would have derailed the entire train, and there would have been a lot of Republicans who would have been badly hurt, if not killed. And I actually went on out and took a look at that section of rail in Google Earth today, and it's basically coming out of a straightaway, so there would have been a high rate of speed, and it just feels weird that somehow the engineer got word there was an obstruction on the track and was able to slow the train down, which means the truck was just sitting there on the track for some measurable interval of time. And if there really was somebody alive in the cab, why didn't they move? Why didn't they just get out of the truck? Why did they stay with the truck? And originally, when they said the driver of the truck was killed, the first thing that occurred to me is he was probably already dead. But then they're reporting there was a second person on the truck who survived and is in the hospital. Maybe that's a part of the lie. Maybe it's part of the cover-up. But it doesn't feel legit to me.
But my biggest question, that I have is, all right, you have half of Congress on a train, going to a resort. We have drones. We have helicopters. This thing's probably one of the most secure whenever this happens. I'm sure there's security all over. Why wasn't there an alert way ahead of time? This thing just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel right at all. And I don't understand what this would even if a bunch of people were killed, half of Congress was killed or the Republicans were killed, what it would actually do. Is it going to give the Democrats the majority in the Senate next year? I mean, that's pretty big.
Certainly they wouldn't have to worry about defeating a popular incumbent that would level the playing field for a lot of these races. And again, this particular train route is special because, again, this is the train route by which Congress would be evacuated to the Greenbrier in the event of imminent nuclear war. And so it probably has higher security than normal rail systems. There's probably extra security cameras looking at it. This is a route that is specifically prepared to be used in time of emergency.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what I had thought, and that's why I think this story and everything that every news media says we need to take with a grain of salt and examine every little minute detail. And we shouldn't have to be a population that examines everything. We should be, but there should be a media that we should be able to trust. I mean, right now we can't. These are like the fifth column or the fifth estate, whatever you want to call it. I mean, these people are, and I'm talking about the corporatized media or the fake media, whatever you want to call it. These people don't have our best interest. They want to sell you the next person, sell you the next war, and we all know what this is coming down to. I mean, this is absolutely insanity, and I'm sorry, I'm hoping one of these days to have a little boy or little girl, and I don't want them to grow in a dictatorship or a regime or whatever it is. I want them to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But the way we're going, we're not going to have that, and I don't want to raise a little up in this type of called tyranny. I mean, it's insane. It's insanity.
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. And I agree with you. My generation has failed the younger generation. We have not been able to provide them a better world to live in. It is going downhill. Now, but again, I still think that the long-term outcome for what's going on in Washington, D.C., and this scandal could be the initiating event, is a Soviet Union-style collapse followed by the American people getting together and saying, we're going to restart this country, and we're going to restart it but with rules that work for the people. And that's going to be primarily the Constitution, and the first 13 amendments is a good place to start, and just make a better country for ourselves and our children, and try and have as many safeguards against crime and corruption and monopoly, and again, take it upon ourselves to warn the next generation. Beware of politicians and beware of corporations. They are not to be trusted. Anyway, listen, Kevin, I got to let you go. We got to take another break for commercials, and I've got another call waiting on the line. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're going to take another phone call from Don in the Philippines. Aloha, Don. What's on your mind today?
Well, Mike, yes, I don't know exactly what happened there in the train in West Virginia, but there's a precedent for Democrats trying to kill Republicans. That guy, the Bernie bro down there that went to the softball field, he said, I got nothing else to do today. I'm going to take my gun down to the softball field and start shooting Republican congressmen. And that thing, what finally happened? Did that guy ever get convicted of anything or what?
Yeah, he got put away. I mean, they basically described him as being crazy, and I don't know what happened to him ultimately. But thank goodness he was a lousy shot, because he only hit one person seriously, and that guy's back at work. You know, I got to tell you, the timing with the State of the Union, the sheer vitriol coming out from the Democrats, we can't rule out. This was an attempt to basically destroy the GOP leadership and as many Republicans as possible ahead of the November elections, so that Democrats who are coming on in don't have to campaign against an already popular incumbent.
Yeah, if not kill him, it made him think a little bit. So a lot of those Republicans are really not trying to rock the boat. You know, they don't want to come out and go all out against the FBI and the CIA. I mean, they want to just go along with the way it's always been. That's the way their establishment. So you know, the fact that their train gets kind of made them scare them a little bit without actually killing anybody.
Well, I don't think so. I mean, if that train had hit that truck at normal speed, it would have been a full derailment, and a lot of people would have been seriously injured, and there probably would have been a lot of deaths.
Right. Well, okay, I'm just saying that that other thing, the murder there, the shooting in Virginia, the softball field, the mainstream media never did really go into that in depth and find out why the hell did this guy do this and everything. I mean, it's just like, okay, so no big deal. It was a Democratic campaign worker who happened to decide to go down there. I mean, okay, that's it. They didn't look at the overall picture of the whole thing. No,
they didn't go into it in depth, and I'm not expecting they're going to go into, I mean, already it's off the news. Nobody's asking the questions about why was the truck on that crossing for an interval of time. They've dropped it. They've absolutely dropped it, and it does feel funny to me. And given that we've never seen the U.S. government this badly factionalized, GOP versus Democrat, we can't rule out this was a deep state effort to try and just simply kill off a bunch of Republican lawmakers ahead of the midterm elections. And no matter how cynical I get, I just can't keep up. Anything else, Don? Don, are you there? I guess we lost him. Okay, phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And let's see. Take a quick look at something that's going on here that needs to be fixed. Okay. I'm still dealing with issues on the news server here. Getting on back to the news, as you know, the Democrats are desperate to seize control of Congress this November so that they can impeach Donald Trump, even if they can't find that he's actually done anything. They're just going to keep pushing. He was colluding with Russia. He's a traitor. We have to impeach him. It's such a serious crime that innocence can't be used as a defense. Seems to be their attitude. But they're going to have a hard time doing it. Now, obviously, they've got the blessings of the illegal immigrants who are all going to be voting Democrat. And if there's one thing the Republicans in Congress and Donald Trump need to do, is push through a national law requiring all voters show an ID to prove they are eligible to vote. Because the current estimates are right now that in 2016, literally 3 million, some estimates went as high, even higher than that, 3 million illegal immigrants voted all for Hillary Clinton. And they're going to do that exact same thing again. Now, here is the good news. The Democratic Party is in serious financial trouble. The Democrats have run their party like they do the big cities. If you go to all of these cities, they're in serious economic trouble and they're in decline and they're falling apart. You'll generally find they're all being run by Democrats. And the Democratic Party is not only out of cash, they're $6 million in debt and on the verge of insolvency. And that was before the bombshell report that the Democratic National Committee has failed to deliver millions in grants they promised to the state parties. Now, let me explain how they got into this mess. Barack Obama's campaigns were very expensive and basically exhausted the Democratic Party's war chests, which that's normal for a presidential campaign. But Obama, after he won the White House, he kind of walked away. And he wasn't really very interested in doing fundraising for the Democrats. And so the Democratic Party didn't have a lot of money when Hillary started her campaign. And so we've been hearing about all these little things where the DNC and the Hillary campaign were literally arm twisting all of the state Democratic parties to basically send as much money as they could. And that, of course, affected Democratic races in those states. And Hillary Clinton spent a huge amount of money on her campaign and lost. So the state Democratic parties are broke. They've been bled dry by the National Party. The National Party is broke because they shot the wad on behalf of Hillary. And because of all the scandals surrounding Hillary and the not very positive public image the Democrats are putting out at venues like the State of the Union, a lot of their heavy donors have just walked away. Because right now, more and more people are seeing the Democratic Party as desperately in need of more illegal immigrants to vote Democratic, to the point where they've lost interest in taking care of the legal American citizens. Now, Donald Trump is out there at the GOP retreat at the Greenbrier, and he's made a very cogent comment that the Democrats would rather see the Republicans not do well than see the whole country do better. That's the attitude they're getting. The Democrats are out to destroy Trump and the GOP, even at the expense of the American people, and the American people are picking up on it. So this November, like the 2016 election, massive voting by illegal immigrants, unless something is done about it now. And of course, major cheating in those electronic machines. Our election system is a global disgrace. Absolutely here. Okay, now getting into the war zones, and you can almost feel the tension in the air among the informed people. And there are a lot of other people who are walking around in denial, where they're not paying attention because they're not getting this information on the corporate media. the corporate media is all about the rivalry between the Democrats and the Republicans. It's all about Donald Trump's State of the Union, and school shootings and a fashion show. That's it. Unless you're following the independent media, you don't know what's going on and how dangerously close we are to a global conflagration. So let's start with Syria, because that's one of the hottest of the hotspots right now. Apparently, Tiger forces have achieved a major breakthrough against Hayat Tahrir al-Sham and in the province of Idlib, and government troops liberated over 15 villages, including Mushayrifah, Tal Sultan, and Al Tuwaim. And this advance pursues two goals, which is to liberate the remaining militant-held areas in southern Aleppo and to prepare for the advance on Zagreb. Now, the Turkish army is expanding its operation in Afrin. They're claiming to have killed 800 militants, Kurds, so far. Now, Syria has gone to the United Nations and filed a formal complaint about Turkey's incursion into Syria, the assault and the occupation. And Syria is claiming that the Turkish operation in Syria constitutes a violation of the United Nations Charter, which is certainly true. But I think Syria is also dropping a hint about the United States, because the United States' continued occupation of Syria is a violation of the United Nations Charter. Meanwhile, Russian observers are saying that the reality is the Turkish operation in Afrin is actually killing civilians. They're not all Kurdish militants. Innocent civilians are being killed. They can't get out of the way fast enough. Apparently, doctors in the region are saying civilians are not only being killed, they're being wounded, and the hospitals are running out of beds. They're running out of medical supplies. And according to the doctors, at least 65 civilians have been killed in the 11 days since Turkey came across the border. Now, the United States is basically occupying Syria. They're starting to use that word. And Trump is basically, he's decided he's not going to go back to this idea that Assad is gassing his own people, and that Assad is a terrible ruler, or that we're really there for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Basically, the new strategy is, well, we're here, and we're going to stay, and we're going to stay here to transform the political structure as a model for the rest of Syria and the rest of the Mideast. In other words, regime change again. So basically what we've got is mission creep of a sort. I mean, the agenda was always to replace Assad with an obedient Western puppet ruler. And the U.S. has been unable to do that in all these years, and all this money and all this bloodshed. Okay, what you're hearing in the background is our monthly test of our tsunami and missile alert sirens. This is just a test. It is only a test. I'm not seeing little banners on the TV saying that we're about to be annihilated here. Apparently, the U.S. is still conducting airstrikes up in Deir ez-Zor, killing more civilians, 2 civilians specifically, in the town of Hajin, wounding 12 other people. And field reports are that some of the injured are in critical condition. Over in Aleppo, there's infighting being reported in Al-Bab among the Ankara-backed militants against the Kurds. Apparently, some of the militants of the Furkat Sultan Murad, affiliated to the Turkish army, they're fighting each other. At least 4 militants were wounded during the clashes. What a mess the U.S. has turned Syria into. There's no other way to describe it. There's no other way to describe it. Getting on down to Yemen, it is a huge mess. The Saudi-led coalition, acting as a proxy for the United States, unleashed a barrage of airstrikes on Yemen, killing 71 civilians, some of them children, over the last 48 hours. This is being reported in the Qatar-based news network Al Jazeera. And these are war crimes. These are absolute war crimes. But the Saudis can't gain any headway. They're causing a lot of damage. They're killing a lot of people. There's no sign of capitulation from the other side. And the latest word we're getting is that Crown Prince bin Salman is tired of this. It's costing a huge amount of money. It's making Saudi Arabia to look bad, and they want to get on out. Their problem is they can't find an honorable way to leave. Anything that they do to get out of Yemen makes it look like a defeat. It's the same reason the U.S. is still in Syria, same reason the U.S. is still in Afghanistan. They just want to pretend they haven't really lost. We haven't won, but you can't say that we've lost. Yeah, you have. You really have. Now, Chairman of the Iranian Parliament's National Security and Foreign Policy Commission, Aladdin Bajordi, is saying that Washington is actually taking ISIL from Syria and Iraq and transporting them to Afghanistan, put them on in there to justify their continued presence in Afghanistan. Oh, we can't leave Afghanistan now. Look, we've got ISIS and Al-Qaeda terrorists. All of a sudden, they're running around all over the place here. We must stay. Somebody actually did a cartoon of Uncle Sam bombing a city, and there was this cutout of an ISIS terrorist. And then the next panel, Uncle Sam is walking away with this cutout of the terrorist under his arm. And in the third panel, he's put it up in a new town, and he's throwing bombs at them. That's exactly what's going on. Any place the U.S. wants to invade now, they're going to fly in ISIS and ISIL, have them put on a big show of being, big old mean terrorists, and the war will be off and running again. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We have 2 callers waiting on the line, and we're going to take their calls after these few words from our sponsors. And Aloha America, welcome back to the show here, and I'm looking at a tweet put out by Truth in Government, and they are reporting that as part of the security, because half the Congress was on that train, apparently all of the roads in front of that train were supposed to be closed. And so there's another question. How does this garbage truck get past the road closure and then just sit on the tracks until it gets hit? And everybody's already out there saying, oh, no foul play, case closed, nothing to see here. NTSB is saying they're not going to speculate on what happened. Snopes is already out there saying, no, it's just nothing here. And let's see. Somebody else just wrote on in saying the pictures of the accident, it appeared the truck had been hit head on, not from the side, which means it was pointed along the track. Yeah, this thing is really weird. All right, let's take some phone calls. Ray in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good day, Mike. How are you?
I'm hanging in there.
Excellent. I hope Claire is as well.
Yes, she's doing much better.
Stole my thunder. Great. You just stole my thunder with the previous tweet. There had been an article on Steve Quayle's site earlier, and I believe it was by Hal Turner, which he talked about the security that you just mentioned, a helicopter following, roads and crossings closed, etc. And it sure seems there's something else to it. As we know from previous things that have happened with speculation, these facts will come out. But I think the propaganda minister, whoever he or she is doing backflips as Hal Turner mentioned, there was also a tweet by one of the Rockefellers saying something, and I'm saying this verbatim, that, ha ha ha, the next morning nobody will remember the speech. So the narrative has been forced to change with the accident, and not really to make a pun, but this story of the accident itself is going down the tracks as we see it now.
Yeah, I think somebody wanted to take out a lot of Republican lawmakers, and thank goodness they botched it badly. But yeah, it just doesn't feel like this is legit, especially with the news about the road closure. And I'm going to go and try and confirm what this person who sent the email saying that the garbage truck looks like it was hit head on, either probably on the back, or I want to look at that picture and see for myself. But again,
right.
If there was somebody alive in the cab, why did they not move the truck and get out of the way of the oncoming train? There's just something very wrong about this story.
Questions. You know, I won't waste time on this any further, but try to look at that article. I think there's more there. I'm not going to waste your time with it now.
Okay.
But one thing I wanted to mention, lastly, is that there was, as you know, President Trump had a conference today, and I was listening to it on InfoWars, and I wanted to take a look at it on the mainstream media, so I turned on the television with my infinite antenna, and it was nowhere to be found. But curious was Michelle Obama on one of the talk shows. So they're all spreading their faces around, keeping public, and that worries me to a certain extent as well.
Okay, well, yeah, Ray, I'm going to have to let you go. We got to do a station identification, and your phone signal is really breaking up. We'll be back with another phone call after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2, and I'm just taking a quick look at some of the pictures out here, and I cannot agree with the idea that the trash truck was hit head on. It looks to me like the cab was hit and tore it loose from the rest of the truck, which rolled down the hill and spilled the trash. So I don't agree with that interpretation. All right, let's take a phone call. Tommy in Illinois. Aloha, Tommy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. Say, I don't take umbrage, especially with one party or the other, but they're both guilty of all this murdering going on in the Middle East. Since Israel's very inception, they've been running our foreign policy to their advantage, of course. Mm-hmm. You let one Israeli Jew get killed over there, because they're being killed in all the other countries, there's going to be hell to be paid, literally, by it. And they're still running our policy. And we talk about the immigrants and stuff, you know. We wouldn't have to worry about immigrants if we quit blowing up those people's countries and chase them out of it. And the rich are what's running it in this country to make these wars keep going. You know it. I know it. Mm-hmm. And if you know, those people would rather live in their own countries, you know. America, they got to run to their abuser that wanted sponsoring all these wars and everything just to be able to live. And believe me, they'd rather be where they, you know, where they come from, just like anybody would. And I don't know if it's going to ever get stopped. It doesn't look like to me that this country's geared for not having wars going on, because it's what's keeping our economy going in a murderous way. And I think we're immoral for it. And I don't even think there's a God anymore that's going to make them stop. It doesn't look like to me, because the rich are just getting richer, and the stock market goes up astronomically for what, who knows what. You know, the numbers are fraudulent, of course, but they're making out money hand over fist. But like I say, I guess my main thing, Mike, is that we wouldn't have to worry about immigrants if we could chase them out of their country, don't you think?
Well, there's definitely too many. We definitely need to chase out the ones who are criminals, who are carrying dangerous communicable diseases. And again, we need to go back to this idea that if somebody wants to come to the United States of America, there is a legal process to follow, and no reason for them not to do so. And it's just step by step. There's a vetting process. But what the Democrats want are wide open borders that are trying to flood as many illegal immigrants as they can into the country. They're going to promise them all kind of free stuff if they'll continue to vote Democratic, even though they're not legally entitled to vote. We're in the bread and circuses phase of the collapse of this empire.
Well, there's 6 white families as we speak running Mexico. And, why don't we send an army down there and break that up, and so their citizens will quit trying to run across the border? You know why we don't? Because they're one of our top trading partners. We're not going to cut our nose off our face, and try to do things right. I mean, the rich is what's running everything. And Mike, you missed what I said, kind of respectfully.
Okay.
We wouldn't have to worry about immigrants. We kept blowing up their countries. They don't care about coming here for a better life. They'd like to live in their own country. But the people running all these countries are, the few running the many, and they're wealthy beyond imagination. And so, we wouldn't have an immigration problem if, like I say, quit blowing them up and everything. And
the reason I didn't go along with that one is because the rich are going to take from the poor. They always have throughout history, even in times of peace. Remember when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Pentagon was wringing its hand about, they'd lost their enemy that they'd been using to scare money out of the American people. And so they started getting into all these little adventures just to try and keep that military-industrial complex going. They both contribute to the problem of people wanting to leave a country, but you have to take into account the fact that even in times of peace, the rich will exploit the poor if the system allows them to do it. Now, with regard to Mexico, another factor, of course, is all the violence from the ongoing drug wars between the various cartels. And the U.S. is supporting, I think it's the Sinaloa cartel. That's where that whole Fast and Furious scandal came from, where the U.S. government spent your tax dollars to send the very kinds of weapons the U.S. government doesn't think you should have down to dangerous drug criminals in Mexico, trying to establish a monopoly, which would then allow the cartel to charge higher prices for their product. And obviously, there's a lot of handshaking going on between the drug cartel in this country, which appears to center on the Central Intelligence Agency, and these other cartels in other places, including Mexico and back in the 1980s, Nicaragua, Panama, before they had to take out Manuel Noriega. It's called the politics of contraband. And it's not taught in the history classes in school, but it is a major, major shaper of governments.
Yeah, Reagan took over in the 80s. That's when all these wars started in the Middle East. There was relatively calm going on there. But no, they had to get these wars going and everything. And there's one hopeful sign I'll leave you with, and that's Erdogan of Turkey. Yes. He is strong over there. And who's he fighting against? Why, us, because we're providing help to the Kurds, which is Israel's buddy, and they've had enough of it over there, and then they went ahead and made Jerusalem, for Israel's favor and everything. So I think it's gonna be a blow up, and I think it's not going to be in our favor. And I do see that as a hopeful sign to back this country up, because I don't know who else is going to do it. I think they'll pull Russia into it, and I think China. China's not going to let anything happen in North Korea. They already said, you try to invade North Korea, we will stop you. They said it straight out for everybody here. We will stop you. They didn't make any stipulation or anything. They said, we will stop. And you know what? They will. Thank you, Mike. Thank you kindly.
All right, thank you very much, Tommy, and I'm in agreement with you. And I find it rather amazing that Donald Trump is out there basically espousing great power politics at a time when our nation is militarily exhausted. The U.S. has been fighting multiple wars on multiple continents for 17 years. Our stockpiles are drawn down. Our weapons are worn on out. The new ones being built are very costly junk, and the country is just flat out of money. And again, that's another parallel with the former Soviet Union, because it was tricked into spending huge amounts of money on the military by Reagan's Star Wars program, the Strategic Defense Initiative. And the Soviet Union overspent, and they spent their government into bankruptcy, and that was a contributing factor to their collapse. And the U.S. is now repeating that same mistake. They're stuck in all these wars. They can't make progress. So they're just going to throw more money and more weapons and more of your children into these quagmires until there's nothing left to throw, and that's when it's going to come apart. The U.S. is going to lose this next world war, especially if it goes nuclear. Of course, everybody loses in a nuclear war. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Getting on back to Afghanistan, story out of Al Jazeera, basically saying the U.S. has invested in a failed strategy in Afghanistan, saying that President Trump's decision not to have talks with the Taliban is only going to trigger more attacks and aggravate the situation. The Taliban wants to come to an agreement, which is basically we want to be running our country again. The U.S. is still pushing for Afghanistan to be ruled by a U.S.-controlled puppet regime. Not working out too well. Over in another botched-up regime change country, Ukraine, the United Nations has now declared that the conflict in Donbass is one of the deadliest in Europe since World War II. Casualties are continuing to rise, and that cannot be pleasant either for the people who are being shot and wounded or for the people in the region who are old enough to remember World War II. I'm sure they're sitting there thinking, why do we keep having to go through this over and over and over again? Story coming out of Pravda. Apparently NATO warships have entered the Black Sea, and the analysis is that they're part of the standing NATO Maritime Group 2. And they're looking for ways by which they could break Crimea's defense, which suggests that somebody somewhere is thinking about simply invading Crimea and stealing it away from Russia. Now, of course, the official story is that Russia annexed Crimea, and that is not what happened. Russia didn't steal Crimea. When the U.S. overthrew the government of Yanukovych up in Kiev, and they put in President Chocolate, Poroshenko, the people of Crimea said, well, if that's not our government in Kiev, let's just go our own way. And they held a referendum, and they voted to secede, which is their right under the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Then they held another referendum to merge with Russia. And that, like the first referendum, passed by a huge margin. So they called up Russia and said, we want to be one of the Russian republics. Russia said, sure. Now, the United States has taken the position that they refuse to recognize Crimea's right to independence, even though it is guaranteed by the UN. And therefore, they do not recognize the legitimacy of the referendums. Therefore, by default, Russia has stolen Crimea. Now, this makes about as much sense as one of the guests at a wedding refusing to recognize the bride's right to marry the groom. Therefore, by default, the groom has kidnapped and raped the young woman. I mean, that's how skewed the thinking has become. That's basically what the official position of the U.S. is. We refuse to recognize Crimea's right to go their own way. Now, as you know, there's been another situation where a U.S. reconnaissance aircraft was over the Black Sea and getting a little too close to Russian territory. So they sent out a Sukhoi 27 jet to basically warn them off. And the U.S. was out there saying, this was very dangerous, it was unprofessional. They came within 5 feet of us. And then 2 days later, they released the video showing that in point of fact, the Sukhoi was about 30 to 40 feet away. but anything to make the Russians look worse. Well, the Russian Defense Ministry is saying that either the U.S. keep their reconnaissance aircraft away from Russia or come to an agreement on exactly what the flight rules should be so that there are no misunderstandings. Meanwhile, Moscow is expressing concern that NATO is increasing arms deliveries to Georgia. And I don't mean the Georgia in the American South, I'm talking the Russian Georgia. A lot of heavy iron being moved over there. My instincts are telling me we're going to be into World War III for real before this year is out, and it could be very, very soon, especially if suspicions about that attack on that GOP train are true. It's a very dangerous time. And of course, we're coming up on the Super Bowl, target for a false flag attack. We're coming up on the Winter Olympics, another target for a false flag attack. Now, the United States is going to walk away from another treaty, and it's the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, Intermediate Range, and basically it's the INF Treaty. And the treaty was there to eliminate intermediate range and short range missiles, and it worked for a while. Now, the U.S. is accusing Russia of having violated it with one of their new missile systems. Russia, of course, is denying that, but using that excuse that Russia is out there doing bad things, the U.S. is now starting to build new missiles capable of leveling Moscow. So everybody's arming up. Everybody is arming up. Now, this is a very bizarre story, and I'm having trouble figuring out what exactly is going on. The article came out of the Times of Israel. It says, U.S. troops arrive for drill simulating massive missile attack on Israel. And it says, U.S. forces are deploying in Israel ahead of a large-scale joint Israel-U.S. military exercise due to start next week, which will simulate a major conflict in which Israel is attacked with thousands of missiles. Now, Iron Dome and THAAD and Patriot, they don't have that kind of a capacity. If you're being attacked literally with thousands of missiles, there really isn't much you can do. So I'm wondering if this is a cover story for something else, where U.S. forces are going to be on the ground in Israel to protect Israel for something or to help them do something to some other country, because there's this other story that came on out in antiwar.com. Israel is increasing their threats to attack Lebanon. They still want that Litani River, and Israel is stepping up the war rhetoric aimed squarely at Lebanon, with officials openly threatening to force all of Beirut into bomb shelters and bragging about the impact the war will have on the Lebanese civilian population. Now, it's not clear where the U.S. is on this, because the U.S. supports the Lebanese military even as Israel vows to destroy it. But given the way that Donald Trump caved in on Jerusalem, it may well be that Israel is about to attack Lebanon yet again, and the U.S. troops are basically going to be there to protect Israel from a counterstrike or retaliatory invasion. Here's another bizarre story. This is over in the New York Post. Apparently, one of the founders of Hamas died Tuesday. He'd been on life support for some weeks, and the story is that he was examining his personal weapon in his home, and it accidentally went off in his face. That's the story. He accidentally shot himself. Now, obviously, a lot of people are saying maybe it was a suicide, or maybe he was just flat out murdered. Because anybody with any experience with firearms knows, you clear the gun before you do anything else with it. If you're going to examine your personal weapon, you pull the clip, you make sure the chamber is empty. That's automatic. It's drilled in. I'm not buying that this guy, just for the heck of it, took out his gun, fully loaded, round in the chamber, and was pointing at his own face just to look at it, and it goes off. Now, Hamas is officially saying, yes, it was an accident. It doesn't make sense to me. It doesn't make sense to me. Now, unfortunately, when I was very young, somebody in our town in New Hampshire did try and commit suicide with a firearm in their face, and that was kind of ugly. That was the only shooting incident we had in that town in all the years that I lived there. Everybody had guns. Now, Donald Trump, who's already talking trade war with China, has declared China is a military rival, a U.S. competitor on the economic and military fronts. This was in the State of the Union address. And this is basically signaling the Trump administration, his idea of making America great also includes a great power strategy to dominate the rest of the world. All he's missing is that little Charlie Chaplin mustache. We're going to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as you know, the U.S. Has hit North Korea with all kinds of sanctions and arm-twisted a lot of other nations to go along with it. And it is having an effect. And North Korea has started to dial back on their military exercises as shortages of food and fuel worsen. And what's really amazing is you hear this constant screed on the corporate media about what a terrible ruler Kim Jong-un is because of all the people starving in North Korea. But it isn't up to Kim Jong-un. The starvation blockade is coming from outside. Okay. Russia is warning that cutting off North Korea's oil supplies could be interpreted as an act of war. Okay, I keep getting this here. We're still trying to figure out a way to get people to see the YouTube video, and what's really amazing is there is a block at the top of the main page. And there's also the URL for the YouTube feed is in the top announcement, you know, where it says announcement and it's blinking very slowly. Look right underneath that. Got to read, people. I mean, I wish I could embed the YouTube player. They won't let me. I'm looking at another system where there'll be an embedded player and you can just sit back and be presented with the show. But to see it right now, you actually have to go out and read the instructions, and it will be there. Okay, let's take a phone call from Steve Elkins. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you talked about Democrats who pander, to pull the lever for them, and which brought back something I talked about a couple weeks ago, which not California, but Florida is expecting probably right around 250,000 Puerto Ricans who are citizens by definition, But there was something written in the paper here locally in the Orlando Sentinel that speculated that they thought they would all basically turn and register as Democrats, and they were hoping that would happen to change the political scope of Florida.
Yes.
But it has turned out in the last week, I guess I saw an article that said that what they thought would happen is not happening, and the arrivals are registering as independents. So,
ooh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. There was that story that came out a couple of weeks ago where, as illegals pour across our southern border, somebody was gathering them up and putting them on airplanes to fly to other parts of the country. And I speculated at the time that the illegals are basically being dumped into districts that are just slightly GOP in an effort to flip them back as well. This is a very ugly, dirty situation. I'll tell you what Trump and the GOP needs to do right now. Cannot wait. Voter ID law, mandated national voter ID law. and just ram that through. And of course, the Democrats are going to scream and cry and say it's racism, and no, it isn't racism. Illegal is not a race.
No, I agree 100%. You show an ID to buy alcohol. You show your ID to do a lot of things.
Yes.
Now, something as important that could change the course of history in voting versus legal versus illegal, and they don't want to check IDs is amazing. I agree with you 100%. They definitely need to put that into law. And you did mention something else I just want to bring out, that Snopes. Now, that is the absolute worst. That is a website to look at for information. That is a disinformation service.
Oh, I know that.
I tell people to avoid that like the plague.
Yeah, I don't go there anymore. It's just I thought it was – I put that out there because if Snopes is saying there's nothing to this train crash, to me that's a red warning flag.
I agree. They flipped in the last year or so. They are quite different than when I first discovered them also. I just avoid them like the plague and tell people if you see it on Snopes and there's something that you should be looking at and they're telling you not to, avoid these people. It's a fraud.
Yeah, it's a gatekeeper. And there's a lot of them there, and I think...
Hey, thank you, Michael. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks a lot, Steve. I think Snopes is ultimate funding is coming from George Soros. And apparently they've had some internal scandals as well involving the people who actually run it, who have in at least one case, a very colorful background in the adult entertainment industry, which I don't personally see as really being a qualifier to be an expert on what is real or not on the internet. Okay. Let's see. We're coming up here on another break. When we come on back, we're going to talk about the economy. The first thing we're going to start with is, remember when the GOP tax plan went through and there was all this talk from companies like Walmart about how we're giving raises and bonuses? The part Walmart didn't mention is they're getting ready to lay off thousands of people and they're getting ready to close a whole bunch of stores. They're calling it an effort to manage their fleet effectively. But apparently they didn't have a good Christmas either. We're going to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And looking back at Trump's State of the Union speech, the whole first part was about the economy. It's doing great. Everything's wonderful. Low black unemployment rate, low Hispanic unemployment rate. Various other claims about overall unemployment, which we know are less than accurate. But Trump did leave some things out of the speech, like the national debt and the nationwide pension crisis. And nowhere is that crisis worse than Illinois. And the state's in serious trouble. They're on the brink of bankruptcy, and they have 5 different retirement systems that are running deeply in the red. According to this article, it's due to lackluster contributions. Now, obviously, that's going to be an issue. If there really is high unemployment, then money into pension funds does dry up. Money into Social Security dries up. But there's also that factor that back in 2008, when Wall Street was running that mortgage-backed security racket, the ratings agencies rated all these bundles AAA, which made it legal for pension funds to invest in them. And then when that whole fraud collapsed, pensions all across the country, public and private, were defunded. And nobody had the courage to stand up and point the finger of blame at Wall Street and say, these guys messed us over. Instead, we got, the teachers are expecting too much, old people are living too long. Really, it's all their fault. Blame the victim here. So Illinois has got a serious trouble. The state itself is currently $129 billion in debt. And there's a provision in Illinois' state constitution that prohibits reducing worker retirement benefits, which would be cheating those workers who paid into the system their entire working life, expecting a certain return. So they're in a mess. And apparently they have decided their best option now, they're going to borrow $107 billion to invest it in the financial markets and hope that the profit they make from the investment will exceed the interest on the loan by a wide enough margin where they'll be able to use that money to refund or the retirement programs and possibly retire some of the $129 billion debt. This is, of course, insane. I was saying earlier in the week, don't get into the investment market unless you've got risk capital that you can afford to lose. Never borrow to invest. That's what got people in trouble back in 1929. And here we have a state government that may just go ahead and do the same mistake. They're going to borrow $107 billion. They're going to invest it in the financial markets. What if there's another? Everybody knows a correction is coming. What if there's another 2008? Somebody tries to game the system and the whole market plunges. Illinois could find itself now with a $236 billion debt and still nothing in the pension funds. This is absolute bad management. But then I understand they're between a rock and a hard place. The entire country is. Why? Because we are enslaved to a privately owned central bank that issues all of the public currency as a loan at interest. And by design, private central banks create more debt than money with which to pay that debt until the entire system collapses, which is where we are now, on the verge. Illinois can't pay their debts. They're hardly alone on that one. Now, out in Stockton, California, they've decided to go ahead and launch an experiment into basic income. And what that means is that certain citizens will just receive $500 a month, no strings attached, with the idea of helping people who are struggling economically to thrive. Actually, it sounds like just another welfare system. And again, whose money are they spending? Now, 1 in 4 people in Stockton live below the poverty line because of wage stagnation, job loss, rising housing costs, and they're hoping that $500 a month is going to turn these people's lives around. I'm sure it will be gratefully received. I think it's too little too late. Now, here's an interesting story. This came out of Your Destination Now. Apparently, there's a new documentary that's come on out about how this young woman received a rent-free apartment in return for sex with the landlord. When I was young, they used to call this being a kept woman. But current estimates are that across the country, 250,000 female tenants are receiving rent discounts, if not free lodgings, in return for sexual favors. It's another bad sign for the economy. Out in Los Angeles, their homelessness has surged 75% in 6 years. This is a crisis. It's been a long time in the making, and it has to do with economic stratification in part. People have been left behind by what they're still calling the economic recovery, but they can't compete with young professionals who have bid up rents and housing prices to record high levels. Now, in a bygone era, the poorer people would have found refuge in the old crumbling hotels and tenements. But during the post-recession spree, Los Angeles land developers just went wacko, tearing down buildings, evicting people, putting up new developments with higher rents or purchase prices, And so there isn't any affordable housing. And the problem has only gotten worse since Mayor Eric Garcetti took office in 2013, and a liberal Democratic supermajority emerged in 2016 on the County Board of Supervisors. So in Los Angeles, you've got 10 cities. They're running from the Antelope Valley Desert to the Santa Monica coast, with stopovers in communities like Bel Air. And that was where there was a homeless cooking fire that was thought to have started the Skirball wildfire. The economy is not working for the American people. It's working great for the corporations, working great for the military-industrial complex. This country, this government does not work for ordinary Americans. And nobody seems to be all that concerned about it. Here on Oahu, we've got 8,000 homeless people. And all that the local government can think about doing is just make sure the tourists don't see them. It looks bad. Our homeless problem actually got national exposure on an episode of Dog the Bounty Hunter, where they went into this homeless camp that's hidden under the trees around the north shore of the center lock of Pearl Harbor. And it's nasty in there because when I was working on Lost, we shot an episode at this school. It was closed down, wasn't being used. It's being used again now. But it was basically closed down at the time. And right on the other side of the fence, the homeless camp started. And our local government was very unhappy with Dog the Bounty Hunter for making Hawaii look bad to the rest of the country. Unfortunately, that's how a lot of politicians think. How does it look? Let's not deal with the ugly reality of what's going on out there. You know, we just have to make it look good for the tourists and the voters. Apparently over in San Pedro, a security video apparently caught a Los Angeles County Sheriff's deputy simply dumping a homeless man out of the car and then driving away. And that is an issue. A lot of communities play that dumping game, especially if they only have a few homeless. You know, let's just get them out of here. We'll drive them over someplace and someplace where they can, get lost in a larger crowd, the 10 cities and so forth. When Claire and I were involved with helping the homeless and hungry, we actually met somebody who said that some of these small towns on the mainland were actually buying one-way tickets for their homeless to come to Hawaii. Because if you're going to be homeless someplace, Hawaii's pretty good. No snow, sunny beaches, and go swimming and fishing every day. Except that, again, we're getting really crowded. Something does have to be done. And it seems like government goes the other way. And here is a good example of that. This story came out of Decatur, Illinois. Now, there was this gentleman, Camille Chef Sanders. And he's a licensed chef. He's got his food handler's license. And he basically had just lost his job in a restaurant, so he had all of his cooking stuff at home. And what he was doing was he was cooking up meals for the local homeless. And he's a licensed food handler. He's a chef. It's probably very good food. And he got raided by the police and health department officials. And they confiscated all of his equipment. He'd been trying to start a catering business out of his home. So now that business is gone. All because he made food to give to the homeless. And there are more and more places across the country where they're now criminalizing, trying to help these people whose lives have been destroyed by predatory corporations, Wall Street misdeeds, and corrupt politicians. Claire and I have looked a lot of these people right in the eyes. They don't deserve to be homeless. They don't deserve to be hungry. Yes, there's a few people out there with mental health issues who probably ought to be in a facility, but that funding has been cut. But the vast majority of them, they haven't done anything to deserve this. It was done to them. These people are victims. And every time the police come and shut down another program to try and help these people, they're victimized all over again. Meanwhile, of course, all kinds of free food and money and all kinds of goodies for the illegal immigrants and the refugees. They're being treated better than the American people. And I think we need to make that point between now and November, that this seems to be the policy of the Democratic Party, that the illegal immigrants and the refugees are a higher priority than we, the American people. It's going to be an easy sell. Now, Immigration and Customs Enforcement has started a nationwide scanning movement to crack down on illegal immigration. I know they're supposed to be doing one in California that is being opposed, obviously, by their liberal politicians. I haven't heard how well that's going, but apparently Immigration and Customs Enforcement is now starting to really try and crack down, and they need to. If somebody wants to come and be a citizen in the United States, there is a proper procedure to follow. And yes, it involves a little more paperwork than just stepping across the border. But you can do it. And if you go through that legal immigration process, welcome. Glad you're here. Hope we're not too big a disappointment, because the United States, the reality of our country, is nowhere near what you're seeing in movies and TV shows coming out of Hollywood. Story coming out of Fox News, no less. Apparently, the University of California basically put in a policy called 2109. Basically, they were trying to correct a problem where the University of California was favoring illegal immigrant students over the out-of-state Americans. And this upset state lawmakers, who said it's all well and good that you're offering an education to illegal immigrants, and I don't know who's paying for the illegal immigrants to go to the University of California. That's another matter entirely. But University of California, obviously students from California are first in line. But this idea of giving higher priority to illegal immigrants who aren't even supposed to be in this country over American students who are just in other states, that upset a lot of people. And apparently state lawmakers threatened to withhold funding from the university system of $20 million if the officials didn't cap the number of these illegal immigrant students, to give a higher priority. So, let me go back and look at that one again. Let's see this. No, apparently the state lawmakers wanted the university to give the higher priority to illegal immigrants. That's more in keeping with the way California thinks. I'm glad I went back and I checked that one. And again, another example. To liberal Democrats, illegal immigrants are a higher priority than American citizens. We need to get that message out between now and November and just keep hammering it over and over again. Don't vote Democratic. They're not going to care about you. They're obsessed with refugees and illegal immigrants. They will not take care of you. Meanwhile, over in Germany, there is a town, Bornheim, that has just flat out banned all migrants because of the out-of-control rapes and other attacks on their people. And I'm sure there's going to be a collision course with Angela Merkel, but it's fine that these people put their foot down collectively and said, this is it. We can't take this anymore. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And this Las Vegas story won't go away. And of course, we're talking about the October 1st mass shooting by person or persons known and unknown into this concert from the near the top of the Mandalay Bay Hotel. And there are a lot of very bizarre things about the story. And the latest development, of course, has to do with the Clark County coroner, who has been refusing to release the autopsy reports on the victims or on Stephen Paddock. And interested parties went to court, and a judge ruled that the coroner has to release the autopsy reports, and also ordered the coroner's department to pay $32,000 in legal fees. The coroner has now released 58 autopsy reports with all the names redacted, and there is no ballistics data included. Stephen Paddock's autopsy is still being withheld by the coroner. Now that right there tells me, yeah, something's being hidden. If this really was just a crazed lone nut killer, Stephen Paddock, there is no reason not to release the autopsy reports with all the information, the names, the ballistics. It would all line up with the one shooter. By redacting the names, it's impossible to take an autopsy report and say, this applies to the person who was standing at this location here at the concert. You can't map them out. And the only reason that I can think of to withhold the ballistics information is if there were different kinds of ammunition being used. So, it stinks. It just feels weird. And we seem to be seeing more and more of these very bogus operations. We know that the Boston Marathon was a setup. Las Vegas was clearly a setup. We may see something again at the Super Bowl. I'm very worried about that. And the more I think about this train accident with half the Congress on it, the Republican half of the Congress was on that train, I think that was an attempted coup d'etat by the Democrats. Can't prove it, obviously, but I can't get it out of my head. There's just too many weird things about this story. Going to do a little more digging into it, though. Now, let's talk about education. And I'm so glad that we're getting rid of Common Core, but a lot of it is still lingering. It's going to take a while to get something new in there. So here's this bizarre story. Apparently, there was this 7-year-old girl, and she brought home some homework, and the mother just couldn't figure it out. There was a word problem. There are 49 dogs signed up to compete in the dog show. There are 36 more small dogs than large dogs signed up to compete. How many small dogs are signed up to compete? The problem is the answer is 42 and a half. Does that make any sense at all? We got to take a break here for station identification. We'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3, and we're being a little bit delayed connecting with Greg Felton. So while we work out those technical issues, a couple more news stories from the world of computers. Apparently there's been this big, huge problem over at Google where their corporate culture is intensely liberal. And apparently there has been serious misconduct toward conservatives, which was made public. And it makes Google look bad. All that money spent on the internship to make Google look like it's the greatest place on earth to work, and it was just destroyed. But apparently a senior vice president at Google is promising to act against all employees who raise their voices against the company's pattern of misconduct toward its conservative personnel. Okay, we have Greg on the line right now. So joining us is Greg Felton. He's an author, and he's written a lot of books. I'm looking at his Amazon page here right now. Books like Enemies by Design, Inventing the War on Terror, Exploding Middle East Myths, and of course his new one, The Host and the Parasite. So Greg, thank you for spending time with us today, and tell us about your new book.
Well, first of all, one slight correction: the Enemies by Design, that was published without my permission. I had written it with a publisher who behaved rather unethically, so I divorced myself from it. I restructured it and reissued it as The Host and the Parasite: How Israel's Fifth Column Consumed America. It's now out in third edition, and it can be found at thehostandtheparasite.com. It has its own website.
Okay.
And it incorporates the development or the decline of the United States into neo-fascism through the Obama and Trump years. So this brings you right up to Donald Trump, and it explains how he came to power. So everything here is predictable, and one of the interesting things about current American political language, to the extent that it even exists, is that many people look at Donald Trump as the beginning of the end of America, that he's this horrible, bombastic, racist, misogynist, blah, blah, corrupt, cronyistic politician that is sort of the start of something, but it isn't. Donald Trump is the end result of a long series of degenerative presidents that begins more or less with Ronald Reagan. And in fact, Donald Trump's presidency could have been predicted up to a point, because when he won the leadership of the party in 2016, the Republican Party had ceased to exist in any intellectual sense. It had essentially committed intellectual suicide. Any genuine conservatives had been pushed out and been replaced by neocons.
Yes.
And Donald Trump represents the recognition that the party had become brain dead. As I say in my book, he just had to step over the corpses. There was no one left to challenge him. He beat more than a dozen professional politicians for the leadership. And that tells you how bankrupt, intellectually bankrupt, the Republican Party had become. So the book tells you a little bit about how that happened and how and why Hillary Clinton lost the Democratic nomination as well.
You mean when in Obama's second term?
Well, the thing is, after Obama's second term, Hillary Clinton was the anointed successor.
Yes.
And what she was Israel's candidate. She was essentially a treasonous implant in the Democratic Party. But the fact that she lost the election is truly astounding, because essentially it was fixed for her to win. The press savaged Donald Trump. They ignored Bernie Sanders. They skewed their reporting to favor Clinton. They suppressed anti-Clinton news.
Yes.
They tried to make her look human when she's little more than a female cyborg that serves business interests like Goldman Sachs and the other banksters, whom she admitted she represented when she was senator. So you look at how this happened and how Clinton could not win the election. And this is, again, for the Democratic Party, a symptom of the Zionization of America, and how the United States has become little more than an Israeli-occupied satrapy. And this is the one thing I want people to realize from my book, is that the United States does not exist as an independent country. It hasn't existed as an independent country, at least since Ronald Reagan. And The Host and the Parasite tells you how this happened and how it was done with open eyes.
Yeah, most of us who are listening to this show, we've watched this happen, certainly paying attention with Obama, and we're well aware that Israel is just basically openly contemptuous of the American people. They hate the Bill of Rights. And what's really alarming is how many members of our government are willing to go along with ridiculous laws that are clearly unconstitutional. Now, some judges are starting to push back. This idea that in order to get a job that you have to pledge you will never boycott or criticize Israel, that absolutely is a violation of our First Amendment rights, and the courts are starting to say that. But again, you have to wonder, how does Israel get this kind of control over our government? Now, obviously, there's going to be just outright financial support. We know that AIPAC carries a huge amount of clout. and they have large amounts of money that they can spend. And some of that money basically circulates around a bit, but it originates with the money that Congress votes to give Israel. So it's almost like a kickback scheme. The more Congress votes to give Israel things, the more AIPAC will reward those members of Congress. And it's just endless corruption. Then you have to add in the possibility of blackmail. We know that Israeli companies have penetrated strategically important systems in our country. If we go on back to Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky, apparently Israel somehow was getting recordings of Bill and Monica's phone sex sessions, and they used those to blackmail Bill into ordering the FBI to stop the search for Israel's top spy inside the administration, codenamed Mega. I mean, it's just amazing how much control Israel has and how readily our politicians are just okay with going along with that, even those who are not of Jewish descent or dual citizens.
It is truly astounding, and I think there's an excellent book to be written on how a minority population in the United States, the Jewish population, not all Jews, but most, I would say, back in 48, a minority of Jews, managed to co-opt the government. And there's a lot of different influences, but again, you're quite right, money is the main one. If you take money out of politics, the Zionist lobby loses its lever, its main lever. And it can't coerce, it can't bribe, it can't blackmail politicians into behavior. Matter of fact, if I remember my history, in 1973, after the Yom Kippur War, in which Israel was facing serious military defeat, Israel's government threatened to use nuclear weapons unless America resupplied Israel with jet fighters.
Yes.
So blackmail is one of the great instruments of Israeli terrorism. For example, every congressman or senator has to sign a pledge to support Israel. Otherwise, their districts will get no funding. And this this is grossly unconstitutional. People go along with it because they know that Israel is so ruthless. It can, at some degree, it will have you killed. It will have you marginalized. It will not support you. The press, which is bought and paid for by pro-Israel lobbyists, pro-Israel supporters, will smear you. Bernie Sanders was vilified to the extent that he was written about in the press. He was some sort of socialist. He wasn't. Well, he's an American firster, which makes him a socialist. And I guess it's easy to go along with the Zionists rather than to buck them, because you're up against an institution, you're up against a permanent government of Zionists. And this goes back to 1948 when Harry Truman took his famous $2 million bribe to support the creation, and I use that word in quotes, State of Israel. Because the Congress at the time, the Senate, was thoroughly pro-Zionist. The American public was pro-Zionist out of some ridiculous sympathy for the Jews of World War II. I mean, you have to go back to the Holocaust propaganda that gave the Israelis its moral billy club with which to bludgeon people over the head to support Israel.
Mm-hmm.
There's religious reasons why. I mean, the rabid Christians look upon Jews as some sort of religious kin, and the Muslims are the enemy because they came after Jesus and they don't think Jesus is the Son of God. A lot of it is irrational, a lot of it is self-serving, and because Jews have a lot of influence in banking and other lobby groups, and they're very persuasive, and they pander to people's insecurities, they have managed to build themselves a solid network of influence. It's like if Al Capone had been as strong as the Israeli lobby, we would be living under gangsterism.
I think we already are, but not because of Al Capone.
Are you there?
Yes, you're still on the air.
Oh, sorry. So it's a great story to see how a small group of people can take over a country. It really is.
It is. I think if you look at Israel's strident demands of the United States, they seem to take a real jump right around 9/11. And we know there are indications that Israel and the U.S. Intelligence agencies worked together to create 9/11. There were those dancing Israelis who were arrested. They were cheering as the towers came down. Turned out 3 of those were Mossad. And I think partnering with Israel on something like this was probably one of the biggest mistakes our government ever made, because Israel just turned right around and they blackmailed the U.S. government with the 9/11. Give us what we want here, or we'll tell the world what really happened on 9/11, and it'll be worse for the U.S. than for Israel, because, hey, Israel expects, everybody expects Israel to do this kind of thing. But for the U.S. government, it will be very, very damaging. And it seems like ever since 9/11, there isn't anything that Israel has asked for they have not gotten, including this recent declaration by Donald Trump that we recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. And look at all the trouble that caused.
Well, yeah, that was essentially the most absurd thing that Trump could have done, because it has no upside for the United States, 0 upside. And it confirms what you said, that Israel has a deep and abiding contempt for American interests and American integrity. But I would make one qualification about September the 11th. The government that was in place at the time of September the 11th, I do not consider to be an American government. In my book, The Host and the Parasite, I talk about it, I refer to it as the Bush junta, because the Project for the New American Century, which is the foundation of that government, was openly treasonous. It had no interest in supporting American interests. It was thoroughgoing pro-Israel.
Yes.
And if you look, so you look at the people who did that, it could not have been done without the collusion of the government. And there was no rational reason to allow the World Trade Centers to be demolished like that and the Pentagon to be attacked, unless you were serving the one government that could have benefited from it, and that was the Israeli government. It did not benefit the U.S. at all. The U.S. has no need to go in and bomb Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, anything like this. This is all part of the Zionist plan, the Yinon plan, which goes back to the early 80s, and Oded Yinon, who was a journalist, described the long-term objectives of Israel, which was to bring down certain governments. And America has been the instrument of Israeli terrorism ever since. So I think it's important to recognize that George Bush, or I call it the Cheney government, really, because Bush really didn't have the brains to run the government. This was Cheney's doing. Cheney was the criminal. Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, and a host of other smaller people were responsible for allowing the World Trade Centers to be attacked. And this is what they needed to justify the suspension of the Constitution and the passage of the USA Patriot Act. And we know this to be certain because the USA Patriot Act was written 3 weeks before the 9/11 events occurred.
Yes.
It was written by Philip Zelikoff, who was the propagandist for the Bush junta in the first draft. So you've got to wonder, how could you write a document about an event that hadn't happened yet? So it clearly demonstrates that the World Trade Center was a planned false flag attack. And anybody who buys into the official story either doesn't want to know or is in the business of propounding the official fiction.
I agree. I absolutely agree. Yeah. And it does seem, I mean, I remember when the Project for the New American Century was setting up shop, and it was all neocons and very clearly pro-Israel. In fact, some of the documents that were at their website were directed at the Israeli government. And it was very obvious that they were the force behind the Bush administration's war agenda and just getting us into all this trouble all over the globe. But at this point, we're kind of worn out. We're sucked dry. And there's a real chance that we could collapse. And Israel, I'm sure, is already picking out their next target to be their host. They may go across the border into Canada or some other country. And I'm sure to some extent or another, they're playing these same games in other countries. We know throughout history they were doing the same thing in any countries where they lived. They would intentionally go into those areas of commerce where they would exert control over the rest of society until finally some countries literally would pass laws saying that Jews were not allowed to get into this and that activity because of the abuses that followed. And again, it's a very predatory culture. It's unfortunately part of their religion. And they see themselves as automatically superior, automatically entitled. Everybody else is inferior, and worse, they're fair game. My first wife was Jewish, and she was out there explaining that the Ten Commandments only apply to other Jews, and everybody else is fair game. And when she first told me that, I honestly thought she was, playing a joke on me. But it turned out that really was what she believed. Okay.
Yeah, it is true. It is rather appalling to think that Jews can think of themselves, but that they do think themselves entitled, that they're above the law, that that everybody has to serve the Jewish people, that they're chosen. I call it a sort of a psychopathology of Judaism. The religion does essentially teach people to be inhuman, to be criminal, and I think it could be recognized as a form of mental illness if you think that you're chosen by God and you have the right to murder, torture, steal, and otherwise abuse other human beings. It's rather sad, but the problem is there's one thing about Judaism that I think is attractive to a lot of people, and I think this goes into the psychopathology of bullying in general. If you can think of yourself as better than anybody else, if you can find a belief system that can elevate you above the masses, above the herd, you might want to gravitate toward it because it makes you feel better about yourself. You see yourself as above everybody else. And I think there is a real attractiveness to that. Can you just hold on 1 second, please?
Yeah, I certainly can here. And if Tony in Puerto Rico is still on the phone line, let's go ahead and take that phone call while Greg steps away. Tony, are you there?
I just dropped him, sorry.
You just dropped him. Okay, well, that was my bad. Okay, well, while Greg steps away for doing what he's going to do, Facebook...
I'm here.
Oh,
okay.
You're here. Okay. We're actually coming up now on a commercial break. It'll be a 3-minute break. And when we come on back, I'd like you to sort of pick up where you left off and maybe shift the focus back more to the political than the religious. So we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with Greg Felton after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're talking with Greg Felton about his book, The Host and the Parasite. Apparently we got a call from Frank in North Carolina saying, thank you so much for telling the unvarnished truth. And before we get back to Greg, Fox News is running a story about this law that is being passed in Poland. We're going to go ahead and open up the phone lines again, but only on the topic of Greg's book here. But right now, Fox News is running this story about this law that has been passed in Poland that basically says if you're going to talk about the history of World War II, use the word Nazi. Don't use the word Polish, because apparently Poland was very upset that people were going to some of these slave labor camps and saying this was a Polish slave labor camp. No, they were built and operated by the Nazis. And Israel, of course, is just absolutely hopping mad, saying, no, the Poles did terrible things to us as well. It wasn't just the Nazis. Everybody was in cahoots to get us back then. And so they're literally demanding that they're trying to guilt Poland to get something out of them. And this has really gone on way too long, because the vast majority of people alive today were born after all of that was over. And I refuse to feel guilty about anything that is outside of my control, certainly anything that happened before I was born. And yet Israel keeps trying to milk this over and over and over again. And apparently they're so manic about it. The fact that Poland wants to identify the Nazis as committing the alleged crimes on Polish soil, and then Israel comes back and say, no, you bear the guilt, you bear the guilt. I think it's very revealing to, as to what the mindset is.
Oh, you're quite right. It's amazing. I mean, if anybody knows anything about what happened in World War II, it's the Polish government. And since the Polish government now superintends the Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp facility, they know, I would submit, considerably more about what happened than the Jews of Israel do. As a matter of fact, the Polish government reduced the amount of estimated dead at Auschwitz-Birkenau from 4 million to 1.5 million. And they did so through proper editing and analysis of records of people who passed through there. So that means officially we need to take 2.5 million off of the official dead count, which would bring it down to 3.5 million, not the apocryphal 6 million. And this is one of the things I think that gets up the nose of the Israelis. I mean, if we allow Poland to have any say in this, then we lose control over the narrative. And Israel has to blame everybody for the suffering of the Jews, because as we all know, Jews are the only people who ever suffered. And we see this also in the book by Daniel Stern Goldhagen, who wrote a book called Hitler's Willing Executioners, in which he blamed the entire entire German people for what Hitler did. And that's a sort of collective guilting that is evidenced today in what Netanyahu is doing regarding Poland. I support the Poles. The Poles are right. And the fact that Israel is behaving so irrationally, it tells me that they have no sensible grounds for opposing this, and it's just emotionalism. Eventually, I think we're going to see...
Yeah, I would agree on that. But you need to remember that 6 million is again of religious origin, that there is this prophecy that after the Jews have lost 6 million, the Messiah will come, the third temple will be built, and all will be well. They were using that same number in World War I propaganda. The 6 million Jews of Europe are suffering and starving, please send money. And what's really interesting, of course, is going back to Germany in World War II, it's hard to see where the 6 million came from because there were only a few 100,000 Jews in Germany at the start of World War II, and census records don't show a major population decline at the end of World War II.
As a matter of fact, first of all, the 6 million figure dates at least to the year 1900. That's the first mention I have of it. It gets mentioned in the New York Times, the Pittsburgh Criterion, a host of other newspapers. The 6 million Jews come from either Romania, Ukraine, Russia, Belarus. I mean, the 6 million is thrown out so much that you have about 10 to 20 times the number of Jews that actually existed, all dying or being killed. It's ridiculous. It's utterly apocryphal. It has no basis, in fact.
No, it doesn't. And the other thing to keep in mind, I'm sorry to cut you off here. The other thing to keep in mind, of course, is that these were slave labor camps, and it wasn't just Jews in there. There were Poles, there were Gypsies, the mentally retarded, gays were in there. And so the Jewish population in these slave labor camps was a minority population, and yet the entire portrayal of the slave labor camps is that they were specifically targeted on the Jews, and that is not historically supportable.
No, and I don't know if the Jews were the minority or the majority, but I can say for certain that the figure 6 million was never attested to by anything. Even Adolf Eichmann, who when interviewed by Hannah Arendt would admit to only 2 million, and he would know, I would think.
Okay,
he had no reason to lie.
Greg, we have to take another break for commercials. This will be a 4-minute break, and when we come on back, we've got a caller waiting on the line. So stay tuned. We'll be right back with Greg Felton. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're getting callers at RBN. I'm getting emails here from people who are just, some are very supportive. Thank you for talking about the reality. Others are saying, oh, you're a Jew hater, blah, 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 blah. There's one thing for everybody listening to the show to keep in mind. Think about how we have been lied to by our government for all this time. They lied about Saddam's nuclear weapons. They lied about Assad's sarin gas. They lied about the Boston Marathon bombing, Sandy Hook, all of that stuff. Do you really think being lied to on a massive, continuous basis began recently? No. It's as old as civilization itself. All rulers tell gigantic lies to their population to gain control over them. Ramses told the people of Egypt he'd beat the Hittites, knowing that the people of Egypt couldn't find out that he'd actually almost lost his army. I mean, that's it. Governments lie to their people, and the government of Israel is no different than anybody else. All right, we're going to take a couple of phone calls here. Chuck in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, thank you very much for having this gentleman on. I was just jumped on my computer to order his book. I've got a question. Well, we understand that Hillary would have been worse. That's great, first off and foremost. Yes, Hillary would have been worse. However, in watching what this president is doing, the opinion of the host would matter to me. Is this guy possibly the last real American president, or an American president that we're going to have? Seeing the move that he made, kneeling to Israel and igniting the Middle East against our troops that are already there. Have we totally lost control of our government?
Well, the answer is yes. I'm afraid so. I think what I find interesting about Donald Trump is that when he was a candidate, he spoke against American adventurism in the Middle East, wasteful wars that cost trillions of dollars, umpteen hundreds of thousands of lives. And he sounded like somebody who was going to put a check on the Zionist agenda that basically drives the Democratic Party. But recently, as you have seen, Trump has turned into sort of an anti-Trump. He has been co-opted by the very establishment he ran against. And since Donald Trump doesn't have any real qualifications for being president, he's essentially a bombastic man-child. That's the way I see it. He really doesn't have the background to stand up to them. He's easily persuaded and manipulated, and I think he is essentially he has lost control of his government. That's what I think has happened.
Well, I find myself in disagreement with a lot of friends that I've had for a very long time whenever I say it's time to dump Trump to get back the resistance. Because as long as Trump is there, we have these people who are just enamored with him no matter what we say, and they're just like Obamites. And I say, let them take him out of office to get our resistance back. Our resistance in the United States has absolutely evaporated, resistance being against our government in general and tyranny, but they put the face of Obama on it. But whenever Trump came in, all of a sudden it just evaporated. And that's my concern.
Well, I would agree that Trump has to go, but the danger, though, is, and Ray McGovern, who's a former CIA agent, he made the correct point, is that if you get rid of Trump, you get Mike Pence. And Mike Pence is immeasurably worse. And I say that because Trump is obviously bombastic and incompetent. Mike Pence is very slick, professional, and he would give the illusion of competence, but he is religiously psychopathic. He is a devout Christian, and he has no trouble waging war for Israel. I think Trump is more reluctant to do it, but I don't think he has the backbone to stand up to the deep state, which is essentially run by Democrats. I don't think getting rid of Trump now is the right idea. Yeah.
Well, if we don't, then the next president, and there's no way that Trump is going to win a second term.
No, I agree.
It's going to be Pence anyway. And during this time, we're watching the NSA. Everything that we really used to watch under Obama is still continuing under Trump in spades, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's okay because Trump has the trigger finger." So to me, when do we finally say we've had enough? And I'm with Mike. I don't want a violent revolution, but I've given up on every other avenue we have to avoid it.
Well, you're quite right.
I'm going to go ahead and sign off because I know there's other callers. Mike, thanks for letting me come on the show, and And thank you so much for having this gentleman on.
All right. Well, you're welcome on both counts, and we'll have Greg Felton back again because I'm getting a lot of positive response in the email to him. We're going to now move to James in Ohio. Aloha, James. Do you have a question for our guest?
Yeah, I was wondering if he was aware of the fact that the instructions for Zyklon B indicate that it takes from 1 to 3 days to release the small amount of hydrogen cyanide that is absorbed into it, and also that there have been a couple people who have done videos where they've sat in a nearly airtight phone booth size enclosure with a can of Zyklon B poured out on the floor for over an hour, and I would happily do so myself, and I know a lot about toxicology, but the story told to the visitors of the U.S. Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. is that the Germans poured a can of Zyklon B through an open hole in the ceiling of the so-called gas chamber, and in 15 minutes, the screaming was over. Also, cyanide poisoning often produces convulsions to the point where the spine and the long bones break, and there is time for huge swelling to occur before death. But these symptoms are noticeably absent in pictures of so-called.
Well, first of all, Zyklon B is actually an insecticide. It's used for killing lice.
Right.
And the reason it was there at the slave labor camps toward the end of the war was when the Germans were basically pushed back out of Russia, they brought with them typhus, or possibly the Russians had deliberately infected them with typhus as a biological weapon. And so they were basically using the Zyklon B to kill the body lice that was carrying the disease from person to person. And that included not just the inmates in the camps, it included the staff and the guards, their clothing, everything was being soaked in this to try and prevent the typhus from spreading any further. So that's one misconception that's out there. It's not that powerful on humans, and you're right, one can wouldn't do it. It was a fumigant, and it did take a long time to release the chemical. And the other aspect of it is that a lot of these rooms that are claimed to have been execution chambers using Zyklon B, the wall should be colored blue because cyanide is a stain. That's where the pigment cyan comes from.
Ferrocyanide.
Yep.
Mixing with iron produces ferrocyanide, which has a really blue color. It's called Prussian blue.
Yes,
but that's all right. I had for you. Thank you very much for having your guest on. I appreciate it very much, and I'll let you go now.
All right. Well, thank you very much here, and we're going to take another phone call. This is from Francis in North Carolina. What?
Michael, 1 second. One thing also, your guest is perfectly correct. Your caller was very well informed. But what's also interesting is that the so-called gas chambers, which of course never existed, those holes through which the Zyklon B was allegedly dropped, they were added after the war by the Soviet Union for propaganda purposes. There were no holes through which that gas could have been dropped. And one of Hollywood's greatest disgraces is the film Denial, which manufactures false history to implicate David Irving in the libel.
Mm-hmm.
He charged Deborah Lipstadt with 5 counts of libel. And he won 4 of the 5 cases against her. Only one he didn't win, and that was elaborated and blown out of all proportion. And that's what the basis of the movie is. And in the movie, they falsify history by putting those holes in the top of those barracks, but they were never there during World War II. That was after the fact. So
the Russians also added that large crematorium that tourists are shown that the Nazis used to dispose of the bodies that didn't exist back then. That was added by the Soviets after the war was over to dispose of the typhus-infected bodies. And by the way, if you look at those photos of all the emaciated prisoners, any doctor will tell you they're showing the symptoms of typhus. That's why they were thin and emaciated, because typhus, you get intense diarrhea, you can't take in nutrients, and that's what was going on. It was a major typhus epidemic across Germany. Anyway, let's go on and take another phone call. We're finally going to get to Francis in North Carolina. Aloha, Francis. What's on your mind today?
Hello, aloha to you, both you fellas. Have a question for you as far as perception or perspective is concerned, and for a lot of people it may be viewed as a lame question. For others, it's not. 6 million, okay, you have a figure of 6 million people. Okay, what state in the U.S. would be about the size required to fit 6 million people into, as far as perception goes?
I don't quite understand how to fit 6 million people into a state. The figure is false to be. The figure is false to begin with, though. I don't know why you'd want to do that.
I'll give you that but just for the sake of statistical size.
I think where Francis is going is that she's saying that none of these camps were large enough to even hold 6 million people.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Well, we don't know if whether they came in at one time or whether they were just filtered throughout and some died and they kept bringing new ones in. The whole point is, and Francis makes a very good point, by the way, by bringing this up, you could not physically kill 6 million people in these chambers. It could not be done because there wasn't the technology to kill that, to incinerate that many people. And when you figure that the number of Jews that were carted off to the concentration camps was not constant throughout World War II, that it was accelerated after about sometime in 1944, when the Germans realized they were losing the war. That's when the train started moving faster and faster to Auschwitz and Theresienstadt and other places.
Yeah, because they were factories. They were prison factories that were manufacturing materials for the German army. That's where that stuff all came from. And that's another reason why the Nazis, they actually looked after the health of the inmates very much. There were doctors on staff, there were health clubs, they had swimming pools they could exercise in, because they were valuable commodities supporting the German war effort. And again, slavery is wrong, but these camps were prison factories, just like the prison factories we have in the United States today.
Dave, exactly. I think basically what I was trying to express was, shall we say, misexpressed as far as proportionate to what size of a state is concerned and what one would fit 6 million people into. Not that was the scenario, but I think that how I conveyed it was not exactly well done to get the point across how big of an area that would have been, since a lot of the people, as you stated, were coming in from different directions or whatever have you. As a culmination is what I was getting at. But aside from that, the fact that they're giving such a hissy fit over this, I've yet to learn of one ethnic background that did not experience some sort of if you want to call it a Holocaust, or an ethnic cleansing, or degradation for that matter, throughout the aspect of human history. What ethnic background has never experienced that? And I've yet to know of one as of yet.
Well, you have.
Have a great one.
Yeah, the Armenians, the Ukrainians, for example, they were all slaughtered by, respectively, the Turks and the Russians. There was the extermination of, for many in the United States, of many native peoples. In Europe, millions of non-Christians were slaughtered because they wouldn't buy into the Jesus cult. You're right. History is full of misery. As Hegel said in one of his more sober moments, history is a slaughter bench. And the Jews are not the only people to have suffered, clearly, but they want the world to think that's true so they can justify the creation of Israel as some alleged national home for Jews, which of course it was never created legally, and Israel even lied its way into the United Nations.
Well, the other part to keep in mind here is that, again, Israel uses that image of perpetual victim, again, to extort money or guilt other countries out of more money. But the Jews, again, they have not really suffered out of proportion compared to other groups around the world or throughout history. It's just an image they sell, that they're somehow being gratuitously picked on, and that therefore the rest of the world owes them some kind of compensation. And as I said earlier in the show, I refuse to accept responsibility for things that are outside of my control, and certainly those things that happened before I was born. We've got time for one more phone call. Jeff in Georgia, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, good to talk to you. Good to talk to listen to this person. I just want to point out the Jewish control has been in our government long before Reagan. It was manipulating Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt. It helped overthrow, the coup d'état of Kennedy. Had Jewish the cartel behind all that. They practically ran with a hidden hand the Johnson administration, the soft coup of Nixon. You're never going to win the argument on the Holocaust. Or talk about the good things Nazis did. We're not going to win that. I would like to know what Gregory thinks we have to do to overthrow this, is so that, for the benefit of all people in this country.
Okay, well, Jeff, we have to take a break for commercials. We're going to let you go, and when we come back for the last segment of our program, Greg can answer that question. So we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Final segment of our program today. We're not taking any more phone calls. And Greg, Jeff asked a good question. What do we do? We all know what's going on. We are living under a Vichy government, puppet rulers, and just like the United States is doing that to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, the people there don't like it. Why should we be any more accepting of it? And what do we do?
Well, tactically, one thing you could do is be careful of your terminology. Now, inasmuch as I can agree with Jeff that the Jews have had an inordinate influence on the United States, it is tactically wise not to blame Jews collectively or generically.
I agree.
Because that invites calumny, the empty slander of anti-Semitism, which is, of course, a nonsense term that was invented by a German in 1873. I would recommend you use the word Zionist or Israel firster. Make sure you focus on Israel, not Jews.
Yes.
Because there are many Jews that are not Zionist. And a lot of the great people would be like Neve Gordon, Tanya Reinhardt, Norman Finkelstein, Alain Papé, Tony Ute, Amara Haas. There are lots of great Jews that do not buy into the cult of the Zionist, to buy into the Zionist atrocities that Israel commits. So a lot of Jews, oddly enough, are some of the best allies you could have. And
I have quite a few here at this website.
Yes, that's true. As a matter of fact, Netanyahu has no use for American Jews because he doesn't need them because they're already Jewish, and he's not going to listen to their complaints because they're just very important complaints, and he can't deal with them because how do you criticize a Jew who criticizes Israel? Which is why Israelis need the Zionists, the Christian Zionists, the psychopaths who have no compunction about committing mass murder in the name of a religious fiction. So be careful not to overstate your enemy. Use language wisely and with discretion. The second thing to do is write. Talk to people. Use the court system. And Kansas recently, a judge ruled against the draconian anti-BDS legislation.
Yes.
That is something that use the court system as much as possible. The law can be used effectively, because if you simply retreat into your shell or simply scream at the wind, you're not going to accomplish anything. And this is why a lot of peace groups are really more destructive than anything else. Peace groups and people who complain a lot merely make a lot of noise, but they don't achieve anything. You need to learn how to channel your energies into effective resistance movements. And it might be useful to go into history and to see how other peoples behaved. During the Inquisition, where people criticized the Catholic Church, how did they survive? How did they not end up being tortured to death? How did Russians under Soviet rule manage to survive and not get sent to the gulags? How did the partisans of France survive during World War II? I mean, there are ways to look through history to see how you can behave like a guerrilla. Anyway, before I go, my book is The Host and the Parasite, How Israel's Fifth Column Consumed America. And you can buy it at thehostandtheparasite.com. And you can see how Donald Trump fits into the Zionization of America, which, as Jeff rightly pointed out, predates Ronald Reagan. I source it to Harry Truman. He's the first.
Greg, we're at the end of the show. I'm sorry to cut you off. We're at the end of the show. And there is an ad for the book on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. So thank you, Greg. And we're going to turn the microphone over to John Stadmiller. We'll be back tomorrow with the Lady Claire. Aloha, America.